On the 9th of November 2010, Treyarch's new Call of Duty title Black Ops 1 was released. The game followed the wildly successful Modern Warfare 2 and so had big boots to fill in terms of keeping both the casual and competitive fan bases pleased. Unlike World at War, Treyarch's previous release, out of the box the competitive players were pleased with Black Ops 1 and so competitions on the game began. If you want to know why World at War never made it as a competitive title, as well as competitive play on COD 4, make sure to check out the previous video in this series. That being said, the final competitive modes for the year ended up being Domination, Capture the Flag and Search and Destroy. The only change made from the previous year being the return of Domination, as Modern Warfare 2's Demolition was no longer being played, and to this date is yet to return to competitive play. The map pool for the year was also pretty good, with a decent selection of maps in the competitive rotation. Domination featured just Firing Range and Summit, while CTF was played on Firing Range, Summit, Hanoi and Havana. S&D featured 5 maps, including all of those played for CTF, plus Grid, as well as the year's S&D only map. If you didn't catch the previous episode, I talked briefly about how every game has one map dedicated to S&D only. Think maybe Payload in Black Ops 4, or even Miami this year. As for the weapon meta in the game, the AK-74U stood out very quickly as one of the best guns in the game, and quickly took over as the most viable gun for use in competitive play. Treyarch soon picked up on the gun's quick time to kill, and in the next patch nerfed the gun to a point where it was no longer the best gun in the game. The meta then shifted to one consisting of all 4 players running the FAMAS. Some sub-players did occasionally use the Spectre, but in general the FAMAS was the best gun in the game, and very little could come close to even competing with it. Even though the game received a few more weapon tuning patches throughout its life cycle, none of them were powerful enough to actually dethrone the FAMAS as the best gun for competitive play, or even introduce any new weapons that would seriously be able to compete alongside it. For this reason, Black Ops 1 competitive meta is considered one of the worst by players who played it, due to the painful lack of variety that the game offered. Even now, with games that seem to have very little variety, such as the most recent Modern Warfare, they have a meta consisting of at least 2 weapons, a sub and AR, think the MP5 and the M4. But despite this, I think that if a similar situation was to occur in a COD game produced now, the COD League and Gentlemen's Agreements would mean that these overpowered guns would simply not be used, and instead other alternatives would be picked to create a more diverse and interesting weapon meta. As for the tournaments in Black Ops 1, MLG continued to host the majority of the large events, with competitions held in Dallas, Columbus, Anaheim, Raleigh and Orlando. Each of these tournaments had a prize pool of $28,000, with both Optic Gaming and Quantic Leverage taking home 2 championships, and Team Fear winning just 1. The Quantic Leverage roster that won the first MLG tournament of the year, MLG Dallas, featured an, at the time, relatively inexperienced player who would later go on to become one of the greatest players ever to compete. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. It was, of course, Aches. With a face that would instill fear in any future Optic Gaming fan, Aches would eventually become considered the villain of the competitive Call of Duty scene due to his ability to cause massive upsets on teams who, on paper, he shouldn't be beating. Oh yeah, and I should probably mention that Scump guy, he was also on the roster. More about him in a bit. At the start of the year, GameStop held 2 tournaments on the game, with one being hosted on Xbox and one being hosted on PS3. Both were small tournaments with $13,000 prize pools, which, at the time, relatively small. However, this was the last of any big tournaments to be hosted on Xbox 360 during the Black Ops 1 life cycle. All future events were then moved to PS3 as the platform of choice for the remainder of the year. On the European side of things, EGL, or the European Gaming League, were hosting tournaments all across the UK, and Fnatic took home championships in 2 of the 3 major tournaments played that year. Fast forward to the end of the year, and next and ultimately last instalment of the MLG National Championships was held. This time the prize pool sat at $140,000, which is over 6 times that of the year before. The 32-team tournament saw a team led by Doug Sensamarting taking home first prize alongside Vengeance, Virus and Mutation. Team Envy, who had been a big name in COD right from the start, took 2nd place, and an Optic roster consisting of Merc, Big Timer, JCap and Proofy took 3rd place. Players such as Parasite, Apathy, Rambo, Karma and Slacked all played on teams that took home top 8 placings. Quantic Leverage, a roster comprising of Aches, TP, Fears and Scump, took home 5th place at the tournament. With the final MLG tournament of the year completed, it was up to Infinity Ward to deliver the next instalment of the Call of Duty franchise, Modern Warfare 3. Modern Warfare 3 was set to release on the 8th of November 2011, but to better promote the game, Activision decided to host a 2-day event known as COD XP in early September to allow players to get early access to the game, as well as host a $1 million tournament for teams to enter. While the prize pool was very attractive for the teams and encouraged many to enter, the actual tournament was far from what competitive players had come to expect from Call of Duty tournaments. To start with, the tournament was being played on a game that none of the teams had actually had much of a chance to practice, other than a few off-site pre-qualifiers. The gameplay for the tournament was a 5-map series featuring Team Deathmatch, Kill Confirmed, Search and Destroy, Capture the Flag and Domination, each being only played on 1 map. The tournament also featured pre-made classes for the players to use, and in addition, not everything in the final game was even available to use. Only weapons, perks and utility unlocked up to and including level 30 were accessible to the players. I think Nadeshot summed it up well when he said the following.
I was playing like a douchebag. I was using a SCAR with a heartbeat sensor, with a silencer, and I was using a perk called Assassin where I didn't show up on enemy radars with UAVs, so I was basically invisible.
He goes on to say that the reason Optic was so successful is that they could actually adapt to what was available to use within the game and use that to give them an advantage. So all in all, despite the tournament's insane prize pool, it wasn't the best in terms of competitive balancing, with every player rocking a UAV and a heartbeat sensor, but it had to get better throughout the rest of the year, right? More tournaments, more competitive growth? Yeah, well, not so much. To start with, once the final game got released, the competitive modes got narrowed down to just capture the flag and search and destroy. Domination was trialled, but banned spawns made it very annoying to play competitively, and Infinity Ward didn't care to patch the issues, meaning it never got added in later in the year either. Also, there were no MLG tournaments due to no LAN system being implemented in Modern Warfare 3, so only a few smaller tournaments were hosted that year by tournament providers such as UMG and EGL. None of these tournaments even broke $10,000 in prize money, so despite what seemed to be massive support for competitive play at the start of the year, the game ended up not being what competitive players were actually after. Despite this, the map pool for the game was quite deep, with S&D featuring 7 maps and Capture the Flag featuring 5. Maps such as Arcaden, Dome, Lockdown and Seatown featured in both game modes, with either mode having a few extra exclusive maps. For S&D this was Carbon, Hard Hat and Underground, while CTF was also played on Bootleg. The weapon meta for the game also wasn't too bad either, with the decent 3-gun meta for the majority of the game. This consisted of the ACR, PP90 and MP7 as the most common competitive guns. At the start of the year, the Type 95 burst assault rifle was used, but its crazy 1 burst potential meant that it was soon banned out of competitive play. It did receive a nerf later in the year, but wasn't ever used in competitive play again. As for teams seeing success in tournaments, Optic Gaming picked up Scump in the December of 2011, and the team very quickly began to dominate the online COD scene. They also won EGL 7, hosted in Blackpool, taking home a little over £3,000 in prize money. Apex Esports also had a lot of success in the UMG and EGL tournaments with multiple different rosters throughout the year. They even agreed to pay to fly the, at the time, Optic roster of Merc, Big T, Rambo and Scump to the UK to compete under their org, who took home a first place finish at the event. In general though, the tournaments hosted on Modern Warfare 3 were few and far apart, with most of the growth for the scene coming from online tournaments and game battles matches that players would stream and upload to YouTube. It wouldn't be until the next game release that the competitive scene would truly break through into what we know it as today, so make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you don't miss that episode. So what are my final thoughts on Black Ops 1 and Modern Warfare 3 as competitive titles? In my opinion, both games did actually help grow the competitive scene. Black Ops 1 with the continued growth of the MLG circuit and ever-increasing tournament prize pools, and Modern Warfare 3, although maybe perhaps not the best game for competitive, it did show that the developers were interested in using competitive play as a way of advertising and marketing the game to the wider fanbase. Despite this, neither game served as the breakthrough game to bring competitive Call of Duty to the masses. This game was still to come. I think the lack of LAN support with Modern Warfare 3 was also a mistake that the developers realised, and hence we haven't seen since. But that is about it for today's video. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. Thank you for watching, and make sure to drop a like if you enjoyed. Don't forget to tune in to next week's episode where we take a look at arguably the best COD of all time, Black Ops 2. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.